Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So this is my welcome back after 3 weeks. Sorry for letting it get so long. It's after a work day and I got to work from home, so I'm in casual, which for me is about the same as you always see me, a t-shirt and workout pants, athleisure I think it's called. Got the Frank Zappa t-shirt. Not a huge fan, but I like the shirt, and I'm not the biggest fan. I am a big fan of Zappa. I had a definite Zappa phase. So, what are we talking about today? What we're going to be talking about is what happens when you've got two works out of 9 that don't seem to sync with the other two. So, I read 9 J.G. Ballard books, and we'll get there. But the question that I want to talk about is diversity within an author. So as usual, you're probably not going to get a lot of meditation on that subject from me directly, but it's something that I'd like you to keep in mind. It's something that I'm thinking about right now when we do that. The other stuff that I want to talk about is, of course, transgression in transgressive fiction. This is not the first transgressive author we've read, but it's not a... He's transgressive in a different way often than Kathy Acker or William Burroughs, despite that he's often paired with William Burroughs. So, I'm Mark, and if you're interested, this is several books. So, we've got nine books here by J.G. Ballard. J.G. Ballard is known as a science fiction writer. I'm going to go through these books with you, and I'm going to basically make it clear why that's really not a good categorization for Ballard. It's not necessarily wrong, but people have struggled with how to class him before. And I'm somebody who thinks that science fiction doesn't really, based on my 9 novels of reading, do a good job. But the first book we're going to talk about is one of the 2 conventional science fiction books that I read by Ballard, insofar as we can call either of them conventional. The first is The Drowned World. Now, the book itself isn't terribly unconventional. It's a pretty straightforward narrative. It deals with what happens when the polar ice caps melt. And so the world in that story is completely submerged. I believe there's like a giant iguana mentioned as fauna at one point, but we don't get a huge amount of meditation on the life in this post-apocalyptic world. And the other thing we don't get a lot of is meditation on technology. And so the role of technology in this book is a little different. Rather than say there's no meditation on technology, let's say that the meditation on technology isn't... it's not exploratory in the same way as we think of science fiction. So Ballard, what he does is very much meditate on technology. One of the reasons why I've liked reading Ballard is because of the connections I've seen between him and Bernard Stiegler. But what really happens is that he talks about kind of what it means to be a person using a tool or piece of technology. And we don't get stuff like laser guns. So I wouldn't even necessarily call all of his fiction, strictly speaking, speculative. I would call this a piece of speculative fiction. It is a question of what happens in the post-apocalyptic world where the Earth is submerged in water. I thought the book was solid, but he's not always speculative that way. Now, as for The Drowned World, you get some mention of Joseph Conrad, if I remember right. The introduction does mention that. There's not a whole lot else to say. This is a solid post-apocalyptic world. If you're interested in fiction about the environment and ecology, this is very interesting. But the way that the world becomes enveloped in water doesn't sync with our today's science. So it is important to keep in mind that this was written in like the late 60s, I think it was, or early 70s. So the drowned world, let's give the drowned world a B. So we'll say it's a B. Okay. The next book that we're going to look at is The Drought. I believe that The Drought had a different title at one point, or has been sold under a different title. The book is basically the inverse of The Drowned World. I don't have a lot to say about characters or what's happening in the book. There's a lot of burning things. But for me, this is not actually really where Ballard is. I know that this is how he got his start, and at this point I'm definitely a J.G. Ballard fan. But these two novels are a bit different than what drew me to Ballard. So let's give The Drought a B as well. I don't have a huge amount to say about it. It's been a while since I've read those, so there's a difference in period from when I read Ballard, the first few, and then the latter half of the 9 for this video. The third book we're going to talk about is the Atrocity Exhibition. My copy has a foreword by William Burroughs. I'm going to be completely honest. I read this book. I really enjoyed the book for the most part, but I didn't even really follow the underpinning narrative about the guy who's like a psychiatrist or something when I read it, and I was able to follow it well enough to really enjoy the book. It doesn't play a big role in what's actually happening on stage, so to speak. So I first saw that in that Better Than Food Guys video, and then I saw a J.G. Ballard interview where he talked about it briefly. My reading of the Atrocity Exhibition occurred around the time that I had finished reading Burroughs. And so, for me, this is sort of like, oh, holy crap, this almost reads like Burroughs. I was psyched because I really enjoyed Burroughs. So this book moves very quickly. This is a short read. This is a sit down, and if you want to read something that's a bit transgressive and edgy, so to speak, you can sit down and get yourself an edgy reading in a few hours, say 5-6 hours or something for this. I flew through it. The writing is experimental to me insofar as he's a very different writer. But if you've ever seen a Donald Barthelme story, where he will chop up his story into little tiny section breaks, what we often get is something like that. So we get these periods of meditation or definition on a certain thing, but we've got these little chunked up pieces. It's written in a very that kind of style. Another writer, I guess you could say Lolita, was written in little tiny pieces. I'm just trying to convey that. The book reads very quickly. You can see the beginning of Crash in this book. I forget which of the chapters or stories that the Crash retelling, so to speak, or first telling, is depicted here. But it is somewhere in the middle. You get a story about people who are sexually aroused by car crashes. So really it's 3 works, not 2 works, that are just very different than all of the others. The next book we're going to talk about is Crash. So I was thinking, if I ever get the chance to monetize my channel, there are already a few videos where I mention books that are, I guess, under the category of erotica. And if I had to try to watch my language to get monetized, but this channel's nowhere near large enough, I would have to say this is a book about spice. The book's about it. It takes up the whole book. To me, that kind of conversation sounds ridiculous, and I've only got about 60 subscribers, so I appreciate that. But, yeah, I do appreciate all the subscribers. For me, that's a lot of people. But I don't think I could talk that way. So what I'm going to say is that this is Crash. There's a lot of sex in this book. Now, what's really weird is that the sex very often involves car crashes. I assume that probably anyone who's made it this far in this video has heard of Crash. What I'm going to say is my experience with Crash. I read Crash probably, like I said, like 6 or 7 years ago. And I hated it. Well, I was very open to it, but I didn't really like the execution. The writing felt a little, at times, I guess, staccato. I was kind of shocked by it. I had seen the David Cronenberg film when I was like in my first year of college or second, and for me, I was not old enough for that movie. I'm sure that there are people who, you know, it's rated whatever, it's rated R or whatever, but there's a lot of sex in it, and a lot of very weird car crash stuff. I read this book again because I continued to read J.G. Ballard a few years later. I came back, I read his other works, and I had basically resigned myself to being the weird guy who didn't like Crash. I read it again for this video, and I really enjoyed it after a fashion. I was able to pick out things about his writing that I had found in other writing before. I was able to contextualize the book, and what I will say also is that I was completely unfazed by all of the depictions that the first time I read the book shocked me. So I don't know if that's because I'm now more used to reading books that depict things like that. I got into Gyuta since then, so if you read Gyuta, it's just like, oh, this is on every page. But the book really does change, in my opinion, on a second reading. A lot of the stuff that's probably going to make you uncomfortable if you've never read the book before is going to come back to you, and you'll be primed for it. So if it's shocking still, it won't be as shocking. You'll get a chance to really see what I'm talking about with how Ballard writes about technology. So he's a sci-fi author, so to speak. But this book is present day, or actually at this point, this is in the past. This is like in the 70s or 80s, I guess the 80s. And the technology, the spacecraft, so to speak, are vehicles. They're cars. So I don't think it's right to call J.G. Ballard a sci-fi writer. It's based on these novels. Based on these novels, he's really somebody who writes about technology. He occasionally uses sci-fi forms to do that. But even when he's using those forms, he's in these novels using them in very unconventional ways. So barring that first period with the Drowned World and Drought, he really doesn't stray into that world too much. Crash is good, but I did hate it at first. A lot of people are going to say this should be an S tier book. I'm going to say let's give it an A. It's still up there. It's definitely worth a read. When you read it with all of other J.G. Ballard's work, it feels a bit wrong to put so much emphasis on Crash. He's got a lot of really good books. The next book we're going to look at is Concrete Island. I do hope this is in the right order. I suppose that I could reorder the video to make it in the right order for chronology, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to include this little aside. Concrete Island is not a science fiction novel. I don't even know what Concrete Island is, honestly, to describe it. There is meditation on car driving and how cars become parts of people, so to speak. Our relationship to the death drive that is technological environments and our inevitable collapse in them. But that's only through cars and briefly. What this actually is like a Robinson Crusoe story where a guy has a car accident and winds up on a big island between roads, like a highway. And he lives on that island for a little while. He's wounded. I think he's got a broken leg. There's some other stuff that happens, but the whole book pretty much takes place on that island. You got like 4 or 5 pages probably that are him in the car. I love this book. I would give this an A. So Concrete Island, let's say it's an A. Yeah, I love this book. It's not as satiating as a Dostoevsky, so to speak, or a William Gaddis, or whoever your grand idea novelist is. But this is definitely a fun book to read. It doesn't take very long. Ballard on the whole is not the most complicated writer, except for an Atrocity Exhibition. And you can fly through that. But yeah, Concrete Island, great book. Let's, like I said, give this an A. The next book we've got is High Rise. And this is High Rise. When I was rereading Ballard, this was my my favorite. I was thinking, like, I don't think Crash is totally me. And then I was reading more of him. I read the early books, and I was like, I am totally sold on High Rise. This is a awesome story of a world falling apart, and that world happens to be in the most this enormous apartment building. And the stuff that happens is like the kind of stuff you associate with a movie like Predator. Arnold Schwarzenegger type stuff. People living in jungles. What's his name? Rambo, not the French poet. But I don't have a huge amount else to say about it. The apartment building falls into disrepair. There's like it's the laws of the jungle is described here, and it really does feel like a jungle world. The apartment building. This is going to be my first S tier. My S tiers are probably going to look a little weird. So, yeah. The next book we've got is Empire of the Sun. Empire of the Sun is a realist novel, essentially. It's an adventure novel, but the adventure is a prison camp. And there is not... it's not exaggerated or sensationalized. This is kind of what you would expect reading from the diary of somebody who was a prisoner of war. Ballard was in a prison camp when he was in his childhood. I assume the situation was similar to this. I thought this was a really good book. compared to his other books, certain aspects of it are sanitized. We are not largely dealing with characters with the kind of flaws we associate with Ballard. And when I say that, I'm talking about the transgressive or evil type elements. So, uh, yeah, this is an adventure novel. There's some creepy older guys, but mostly it's just the story of a young guy, 12 or something, 7, 10, I don't remember. But he's a kid and he ages, and being in a prison camp is, there are people literally starving. So it's a very interesting, exciting novel. Let's give this an A. I'm going to re-rank everything. I'll tell you what I ranked it at first, and then I'm going to reflect a little bit and re-rank everything. I hope you're still around for that. Ballard's last two that I read are often paired as a. They say that Super Can is the companion piece to Cocaine Nights. And this is another situation where with Ballard, it's like, I'm not going to avoid my language. If I ever get lucky enough to get monetized, we're doing a book called Cocaine Nights, and it's not going to happen for most of my videos. Cocaine Nights is, in my opinion, and I've seen this elsewhere, it's a dystopian story. The strange part about it, because we would say, oh, a dystopia by a sci-fi writer. Is this maybe like a Philip K. Dick novel if we're looking at something really good? Or if we're looking at something maybe not as good, I'm sure there are innumerable dystopias. In this novel, the dystopia is a gated community. That's the whole dystopia. Now, within the gated community, you've got a little group of people who are essentially living in sin, and I don't mean that in the sense that they're having sex, although they are. But I mean, it's essentially like a little organized crime unit, but they're doing it for fun. And there's lots of violence. Not so much in the actual novel, but the characters discuss it. There's drug use. It's not profuse, but it's definitely in the novel. And it's a murder mystery on top of that. So I would say for the first third of this novel, you're looking at like a straight murder mystery. And it's a little weird, the community. It hasn't really hit you yet that this is a dystopian novel. You push through, and then the murder mystery elements of the story start to fall to the background, and the dystopian stuff starts to come to the front. I love this book. I'm going to give my S tier is bizarre doing this reading now, but I'm going to have to talk about it afterwards. So S for Cocaine Nights. The last book that I read is Super Can. And Super Can is the same type of novel as Cocaine Nights, although the story is slightly different. That said, it really does, in my opinion, feel like a companion piece to Cocaine Nights. I would recommend the two books as one grand novel, and call that the longest single piece that Ballard had written. I'm going to say Super Can is also an S tier. There's more drug use. There's more violence. Rather than a detective story, Super Can is more like kind of a thriller. But there is still the detective element. The detective story is just a little different. It feels different because the premise of Super Can is a mass shooting. So those are our S. Alright, so I've rated everything for you. But I don't really agree with the ratings now that I've made them and said them on film. I hadn't prepared them beforehand. My S tier books are High Rise, Cocaine Nights, and Supercan. And I guess this is where we're getting into the issue with Ballard. I could easily see myself rating many of these books as S tier books. For instance, if I had some different things in front of me, I would have said Empire of the Sun was S tier. I might have said Crash was S tier. I guess the thing is that I'm rating these in context. So I read them as 9 books. I read not 6 of them, yeah, 6 of them a few years back. Like a year after reading Crash, I read the other ones. And I came back and read more of them and made this video. J.G. Ballard changes when you read a lot of him. If you only read Crash once, you're probably not going to like it, and you're missing out on a lot of stuff. I used to recommend people read Crash kind of as a joke. I wanted to see how they would respond to it. Now I would legitimately enjoy the book, but I wouldn't recommend it to other people. The thing that's changed is that when you're getting into more Ballard, you start to realize the minor transgressions that each of the characters is making. And so it becomes kind of a dramatic theory that might resemble something from a figure like Bataille, who seemed to essentially be advocating in fiction with, literature of evil in his own fiction. Kind of a transgression at every moment, so to speak. Every character development in some way is a bit transgressive, and then you've built the book, the entire book, around one crisis or transgressive element that kind of monopolizes everything. So, for instance, in The Bleu du Ciel, the idea of necrophilia is prominent. And I would say that this is definitely the case with a book like Crash. I would be less likely, as I said, to really recommend the book now, but I did definitely enjoy reading it this second time. In general, J.G. Ballard is a solid writer. Reading more of him, I appreciate certain elements of him more. I do think that his prose is pretty solid for the most part. There are a few moments where you might say, "Oh, this is a little bit of a slog," but for the majority, it's very crystalline, clear, short. You're looking at like the high tier of skill in the sci-fi realm that I've been exposed to. So I mean, this is a compliment. I feel like he should be called a writer of technology and not a writer of science fiction. All right, so now that that's clear, you're going to read whatever Ballard you're going to read. But I just had to address why my ranking scale looks a little funny. We've got B's for the 2. I'm guessing I gave Atrocity Exhibition an A. I can't remember exactly what I gave that. Crash is an A. Concrete Island is an A. High Rise is an S. Empire of the Sun is an A. And Cocaine Nights and Supercan are S. So that's a strange distribution, and I just wanted to address it. All right, guys. I appreciate everything, and that's it. Thanks. Several books out.